Thomas Blackwood dismounted his horse, his joints stiff from the 3-day ride through the rugged mountain terrain. The late October air bit at his exposed skin as he surveyed the small mining settlement of Colorado Pass. Unlike the booming cities sprouting across the west, this place seemed suspended in time. Nestled in the shadow of the unforgiving Rocky Mountains, the town consisted of a single muddy street lined with hastily constructed wooden buildings, a general store, a blacksmith, and at the far end the establishment that had brought him here, the Golden Pike Tavern. As a detective from the Pinkerton Agency in Denver, Thomas had been dispatched to investigate a peculiar series of deaths that had plagued the tavern over the past 2 months. 7 men, all miners, had died within days of visiting the establishment. The local sheriff's letter described symptoms of severe stomach pain, vomiting, and eventual death. While poisoning was suspected, no evidence had been found, and panic was spreading among the townspeople. Thomas led his horse to the only lodging in town, a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Holloway. As he tied his mount to the hitching post, he noticed the curious stares from locals gathered on nearby porches. News traveled fast in isolated communities like this one. "You must be the detective," Mrs. Holloway said as he approached her door. She was a stout woman with gray-streaked hair and hard lines etched into her face from years of mountain living. "We've been expecting you." "Thomas Blackwood, ma'am," he replied, removing his hat. "I understand you have a room available." "Last one," she said, eyeing him with a mixture of suspicion and relief. "It's not much, but it's clean. Most men have either fled town or are staying clear of the pike." Inside, the boarding house was sparsely decorated but warm. The smell of beef stew simmering over the fire reminded Thomas he hadn't eaten properly since morning. "Tell me about these deaths," Thomas said as Mrs. Holloway showed him to his room. She lowered her voice. "Started with Jim Hawkins, a regular at the tavern, then Peterson, Williams, and 4 others. All the same weight, terrible stomach pains, vomiting black fluid, dead within 2 days. And they all drank at the Golden Pike? That's what connects them," she nodded grimly. "Sheriff Wilson tried to investigate, but he couldn't find anything. The owner, Edgar Milner, swears his ale is clean, even drank it himself to prove it. And he suffered no ill effects. None. Neither did some others who drank there. That's what's strange. It's not affecting everyone." As Thomas unpacked his meager belongings, he contemplated this puzzling detail. Selective poisoning suggested intentional targeting rather than contaminated barrels. But who would want to kill 7 miners, and why? After washing away the dust of travel, Thomas made his way to the sheriff's office, a small building adjacent to the town's single jail cell. Sheriff Wilson was a tall, gaunt man with a weathered face and tired eyes that had seen too many harsh winters and desperate men. "Detective Blackwood," he said, offering a firm handshake. "I appreciate the agency sending you. The situation is beyond anything I've dealt with." "I'll need to see the bodies," Thomas stated directly. The sheriff's expression darkened. "They're buried already. The last one, Harrison, died 3 days ago. But I've kept detailed notes and spoken with Doc Miller about the symptoms." As the sheriff recounted the details of each death, Thomas's training told him this was no ordinary case. Whatever was happening in Colorado Pass went beyond simple poisoning. As darkness fell over the mountains, he knew his first stop tomorrow would have to be the Golden Pike Tavern, the epicenter of death that had this town gripped in fear. The Golden Pike Tavern stood at the edge of town, its wooden facade weathered by mountain storms and time. A crude painting of a pikefish with a golden sheen hung above the entrance, swinging gently in the morning breeze. Despite the early hour, Thomas could hear voices from within. The mining town started its days before dawn. As he pushed through the swinging doors, conversations immediately hushed. A dozen pairs of eyes turned to examine the newcomer, tension palpable in the stale air. The tavern was simple, a long bar stretching along one wall, several round tables scattered across a floor covered in sawdust, and a small stage where presumably music would play during evenings. "What can I get you, stranger?" the barkeeper called out, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Thomas approached the bar. "Coffee, if you have it." The man behind the counter was in his 40s, with a thick mustache and calloused hands that spoke of hard work before he became a tavern owner. "Edgar Milner," he introduced himself, pouring steaming coffee into a chipped mug. "And you must be the detective from Denver. News travels fast here." "Thomas Blackwood," he confirmed, taking the coffee. "I'd like to ask you some questions about the recent deaths." Edgar's face tightened. "I've answered enough questions from the sheriff. My ale isn't poisoned. I drink it myself every day. Yet 7 men who drank here are dead. 7 men out of dozens who come through those doors weekly," Edgar countered. "If my ale was bad, wouldn't everyone be sick?" was a logical argument, one that had evidently complicated the investigation thus far. Mind if I see your storeroom? And I'd like to know who supplies your ale. Edgar hesitated before nodding reluctantly. I brew most myself. The rest comes from the monthly supply wagon from Denver. The storeroom was clean and organized, with barrels of ale lined against one wall and shelves of spirits on another. Thomas examined the brewing equipment, finding nothing immediately suspicious. Who works here besides you? Just my daughter Lillian helps with serving, Edgar replied. And occasionally Catherine Walsh helps when we're busy. She's the seamstress's daughter. As they returned to the main room, a young woman with auburn hair tied in a practical bun was setting out clean glasses. She glanced up, her green eyes meeting Thomas's briefly before turning away. Lillian, Edgar called. This is Detective Blackwood from Denver. Hear about the incidents. She nodded curtly. Perhaps you'll find answers where the sheriff couldn't. These deaths have been terrible for everyone. Thomas noticed a slight tremor in her hands as she continued arranging glasses. Did you know all the men who died? Everyone knows everyone here, she replied, though the miners keep mostly to themselves. Thomas spent the next hour questioning both Milners about the victims, learning that all 7 had been miners from the Colorado Silver Company's newest claim up the mountain. All single men, relatively new to town, who frequented the tavern after their shifts. As he was preparing to leave, the tavern doors swung open and a well-dressed man entered, flanked by 2 rough-looking individuals who surveyed the room with calculated glances. Ah, Mr. Blackwood, I presume, the man said, approaching with an extended hand. Gordon Hawthorne, manager of Colorado Silver Company operations in this region. I heard the Pinkertons sent someone to investigate this unfortunate situation. The name Colorado Silver Company immediately connected several pieces in Thomas's mind. All victims worked for this man. I was planning to visit your office today, Thomas said. Hawthorne smiled thinly. Then I've saved you the journey. Perhaps we could speak privately? These deaths have affected my operations considerably. Good workers are hard to find in these mountains, especially when rumors of poisoned ale spread. Thomas nodded, sensing that beneath Hawthorne's polished exterior lay information crucial to solving the mystery that had brought death to Colorado Pass. Thomas followed Hawthorne to a table in the corner of the tavern, noticing how the businessman's bodyguards positioned themselves nearby, watchful and alert. The tavern's other patrons kept their distance, though their furtive glances revealed intense interest in the conversation. Your men must be nervous, Thomas observed, to continue patronizing this establishment after what happened to their colleagues. Hawthorne removed his leather gloves meticulously. Fear and superstition run rampant among miners, Mr. Blackwood, but alcohol and company are precious commodities in isolated places like Colorado Pass. Some risks are deemed acceptable. Tell me about the men who died. Hard-working immigrants mostly. Experienced miners. I'd personally recruited from Pennsylvania and Michigan operations. Hawthorne's voice carried a practiced sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. Their loss is significant to our production targets. Thomas noted the choice of words. Were they working on anything specific? A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed Hawthorne's features. Just the new silver vein we discovered last spring. Promising yield, which makes these delays all the more frustrating. And did these men share anything in common besides their employment and drinking habits? Not particularly. Although double quotes, Hawthorne paused, appearing to consider something. They were all assigned to the deepest part of the new shaft. Superstitious types might find meaning in that. Thomas wrote this detail in his notebook. I'd like to visit the mine. That won't be necessary, Hawthorne replied quickly. Mining operations are dangerous for visitors, and we've temporarily suspended work in that section pending your investigation. Nevertheless, I insist. The 2 men locked eyes briefly before Hawthorne conceded with a tight smile. Very well. Tomorrow morning, one of my men will escort you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to. After Hawthorne departed, Thomas remained at the table, observing the tavern's regular operations. Midday brought an influx of townspeople seeking meals. Lillian Milner moved efficiently between tables, her demeanor professional but distant. Thomas noticed she seemed to avoid certain patrons, particularly a group of miners seated near the back. When she passed near his table, Thomas gestured for her attention. Miss Milner, I was wondering if you could tell me more about the men who died, their habits, who they associated with. Lillian glanced around nervously before sitting down. They usually came together after their shift. Always ordered the same thing, Edgar's house ale and whatever stew we had that day. Did they ever argue with anyone, have enemies? She hesitated. Not openly, but there was tension. Some of the local miners resented them. Mr. Hawthorne brought them in with higher wages when he opened the new shaft, called them his specialists. Specialists in what? I wouldn't know, she replied, though something in her expression suggested otherwise. But Jacob Turner might. He worked alongside them before requesting a transfer to another section. Where can I find this Jacob Turner? He has the afternoon shift today. Lives in the company boarding house, the large building behind the assay office. Thomas thanked her and was about to leave when she grasped his arm. Detective Blackwood, she whispered, be careful what you drink in this town. And who you trust. Before he could question her further, she was called away to serve another table. Thomas paid for his coffee and stepped out into the bright mountain sunlight, his mind turning over the cryptic warning. The company boarding house was a long, two-story structure with small windows and a worn exterior. Inside, the common area was sparsely furnished with rough wooden tables and chairs. A few off-duty miners played cards in one corner, while others slept on benches, exhausted from their shifts. Looking for Jacob Turner, Thomas announced. A young man with a bandaged hand looked up from his card game. That'd be me. Who's asking? Thomas identified himself, and Jacob reluctantly agreed to speak privately. They walked outside, finding a secluded spot behind the building. I know why you're here, Jacob said, his voice low. About the deaths. You worked with those men. I'm told you requested a transfer. Jacob nodded, nervously checking their surroundings. We hit something in that new shaft. Not just silver, something else. He pulled out a small leather pouch from inside his shirt. I kept this piece. Don't know what it is, but it ain't natural. Inside the pouch was a strange crystalline fragment that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the sunlight. It had an unusual weight for its size. After we found the deposit, Hawthorne brought in those specialists, Jacob continued. They'd sectioned off part of the mine, worked it separately. Then they started dying, one by one. And you believe there's a connection? I know there is. That stuff, whatever it is, it does something to you if you're around it too long. Gas headaches, nosebleeds. That's why I asked for a transfer. Thomas examined the strange fragment. May I keep this? Jacob nodded eagerly. Take it. I want no part of it anymore. As Thomas pocketed the sample, Jacob grabbed his arm. One more thing you should know. Those men who died, they all kept samples too. Evening cast long shadows across Colorado Pass as Thomas made his way to his next destination, the modest home of Sarah Harrison, widow of the most recent victim, located at the outskirts of town. Her small cabin showed signs of hasty construction but was meticulously maintained. Mrs. Harrison answered his knock promptly, as though she had been waiting by the door. She was younger than Thomas expected, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights since her husband's passing. Mrs. Harrison, I'm Detective Blackwood. I'm investigating the circumstances surrounding your husband's death. I'm very sorry for your loss. She invited him inside without a word. The cabin's interior was neat but sparse. A small table with 2 chairs, a cooking area, and a curtained-off sleeping section. A framed tintype of a smiling man with a thick beard sat on the table. Michael was a good man, she said finally, sitting down and gesturing for Thomas to do the same. He didn't deserve to die like that. I understand he worked in the new mine shaft. Did he ever mention anything unusual about his work? Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. He became different in the weeks before he died. Irritable. Had trouble sleeping. Said he heard things in the mine that others didn't. What sort of things? Voices? Whispers? She looked embarrassed. I thought it was just the mountain air affecting him. Many miners get strange ideas when they work underground too long. Did he keep anything from the mine? Any samples? Her eyes widened slightly. How did you know? She retrieved a small wooden box from beneath a floorboard and placed it on the table between them. Unlike Jacob's sample, this one was larger, about the size of a man's palm, with the same light-absorbing quality. He said it was worth more than silver, that Mr. Hawthorne had buyers back east who would pay fortunes for it. But he wanted to find his own buyer. Her voice broke. The night before he got sick, a man came here. They argued. Did you see this man? She shook her head. I was visiting a friend. When I returned, Michael was agitated. He wouldn't tell me who visited, just that he refused to sell a sample. The next day he went to the tavern after his shift as usual. By midnight he was violently ill. Thomas carefully examined the strange mineral. Mrs. Harrison, with your permission, I'd like to take this to help with the investigation. Take it, she said bitterly. It's brought nothing but misfortune. Before leaving, Thomas asked one final question. The other men who died, did your husband associate with them outside of work? They met in secret sometimes, she replied. In the back room of the apothecary after hours. Michael said they were making plans but wouldn't tell me more. Her eyes met his, suddenly intense. Detective, there's something wrong in that mine. Michael said they found something that shouldn't be disturbed. Those were his words. As Thomas left the widow's home, the setting sun cast an ominous red glow over the mountains. He now had 2 samples of the mysterious mineral and a growing suspicion that whatever had been discovered in the new mine shaft was at the heart of these deaths. He made his way to Doc Miller's office, hoping the town physician could provide insights into the victim's symptoms. The doctor's clinic occupied the ground floor of his home, a building slightly more substantial than most in Colorado Pass. Dr. Jonathan Miller was attending to a patient with a minor laceration when Thomas arrived, but he quickly ushered the detective into his private office once the treatment was complete. "I've been expecting you, Detective," the doctor said, offering a chair. "This business has had us all on edge. I need to know exactly how these men died, in medical terms." The doctor retrieved a leather-bound journal and opened it to recent entries. Symptoms began with headaches and nausea, progressing rapidly to severe abdominal pain, vomiting of a black substance, and finally organ failure. Death occurred within 36 to 48 hours of symptom onset. Consistent with poisoning? Certainly, but not any poison I'm familiar with. I suspected arsenic initially, but the progression was too rapid and the black vomit is unusual. The doctor hesitated. There was another symptom I didn't include in my report to the sheriff. It seemed to... Bizarre. Thomas leaned forward. "Go on." "Their blood. When I performed rudimentary examinations, it had changed consistency, thickened, almost crystalline in places." Miller looked uncomfortable. "I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of medical practice." Thomas placed one of the mineral samples on the desk between them. Could this have anything to do with their condition? Dr. Miller examined the specimen with growing alarm. "Where did you get this?" "From the widow Harrison. Her husband kept it hidden. The other victims had similar samples, apparently from the new mine shaft." The doctor's face paled. "Detective, this may sound outlandish, but early miners in these mountains spoke of a peculiar awe that brought sickness and death. The native peoples avoided certain caves entirely, claiming they contained the earth's poison. I dismissed these as superstitions, but now... You think this mineral is naturally toxic? Perhaps. Or perhaps something more complex." Miller carefully returned the sample. "Whatever it is, I recommend extreme caution in handling it." As darkness fell completely over Colorado Pass, Thomas had more questions than answers. The connection between the mysterious mineral and the deaths seemed certain, but the mechanism remained unclear. And if the mineral itself was toxic, why did the victims die only after visiting the Golden Pike? With these thoughts weighing on his mind, Thomas headed back toward his lodging, unaware that his investigation had already stirred dangerous ripples through the small mining town. Dawn broke over the mountains, bathing Colorado Pass in pale golden light. Thomas had slept poorly, troubled by dreams of dark mine shafts and whispering voices. After a simple breakfast at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, he set out for the town's small apothecary, recalling Mrs. Harrison's mention of secret meetings held there. The bell above the door jingled as Thomas entered the narrow shop. Glass containers filled with powders, dried herbs, and tinctures lined the walls. A tall, thin man with spectacles and a meticulously groomed beard looked up from his work behind the counter. "Good morning, sir." "Walter Simmons at your service," the apothecary said with a slight German accent. "How may I assist you today?" Thomas introduced himself, noting how the man's friendly demeanor cooled slightly at the mention of the Pinkerton agency. "I understand the late Mr. Harrison and some of his colleagues would meet here after hours." Simmons carefully measured powder into a paper envelope before responding. "I occasionally allow acquaintances use of my back room for private discussions." "Is that now a matter for investigation?" "It is when all those acquaintances die mysteriously within weeks of each other." The apothecary's hands stilled. "I provide a location, detective, not conspiracy. These men sought privacy, which is in short supply in a town this size." "What were they discussing?" "I don't make a habit of eavesdropping on my guests." Thomas studied the man carefully. "Mr. Simmons, obstructing a Pinkerton investigation could lead to unpleasant consequences. I could return with the sheriff and a warrant to search your premises." The threat hung in the air between them. Finally, Simmons sighed and gestured toward the back room. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." The back room was small but comfortable, with a round table, several chairs, and shelves containing books on medicine and chemistry. Simmons closed the door behind them. "What I tell you must remain confidential. My position here is... precarious. I'm interested in justice, not ruining reputations unnecessarily," Thomas assured him. Simmons removed his spectacles, cleaning them nervously. The men were planning to sell their mineral samples independently of the mining company. "They approached me because of my background in chemistry before coming west. I studied at Heidelberg University. They wanted you to analyze the samples?" "Yes. They believed they had discovered something valuable, potentially more precious than silver. I conducted some basic tests and confirmed it was unlike anything in my reference materials. Did you determine if it was toxic? The apothecary hesitated. Not directly toxic to touch, no. But the first warned them about unknown properties. There are many elements that appear harmless but can cause gradual poisoning. Mercury, lead, arsenic. Yet they kept the samples. Greed is a powerful motivator, detective. They believed Mr. Hawthorne was concealing the true value of their discovery and cheating them of their rightful profits. Thomas considered this information. Did they find a buyer? They were in negotiations with someone from Denver. I don't know the details, only that they were planning to sell collectively for a better price. And when did they last meet here? 3 days before Mr. Harrison's death. They were agitated that evening. One of them, Williams, I believe, claimed they were being followed. They left earlier than usual. As Thomas prepared to leave, Simmons grabbed his arm. Detective, there's something else. After conducting my initial tests, I began experiencing symptoms myself. Mild headaches, disturbed sleep. Nothing severe, but concerning enough that I stopped handling the material. Do you still have any samples they gave you? The apothecary shook his head. I returned everything. But I kept notes on my analyses. He retrieved a small notebook from a locked drawer and handed it to Thomas. Perhaps this will help your investigation. Thomas thanked him and stepped back into the main shop area just as the door opened. Catherine Walsh, whom Edgar had mentioned worked occasionally at the tavern, entered. She froze momentarily upon seeing Thomas. Miss Walsh, Thomas acknowledged. I was hoping to speak with you as well. The young woman appeared nervous but composed. About the tavern, I suppose? I only help there sometimes when my sewing work is slow. Were you working there on the evenings when any of the victims fell ill? Yes, for Mr. Harrison and Mr. Williams. Not the others. She glanced toward Simmons, who busied himself with reorganizing bottles. Detective, might we speak outside? I have deliveries to make. Once outside in the crisp mountain air, Catherine's demeanor changed. She spoke quickly, her voice low. Those men were poisoned, deliberately, sir. I'm certain of it. What makes you so sure? I saw someone tampering with their drinks, adding something when they weren't looking. Her eyes darted around, checking for eavesdroppers. It was quick, just a sprinkle of powder. Who? She shook her head. I couldn't see clearly from where I stood. It happened during the busiest part of the evening. Why didn't you tell the sheriff this? Because the next day I found a note at my door warning me to stay silent or I'd be next. Her voice trembled slightly. I have a younger sister to care for, detective. I couldn't risk it, but you're telling me now. People are dying. And yesterday after you arrived, I received another note saying it ends with Harrison. I believe whoever did this thinks they've accomplished their goal. Which was what exactly? I don't know, she admitted. But all those men worked in the same section of the mine, the one they say is closed now, Thomas wrote in his notebook, then looked up at her seriously. Miss Walsh, I'd like you to think carefully. The person you saw tampering with the drinks, man or woman? Tall or short? Any distinguishing features? She closed her eyes briefly, concentrating. Slender hands, dark sleeves. I remember thinking they moved very deliberately, like someone accustomed to measuring precise amounts. The description could fit several people Thomas had encountered so far, including the apothecary himself. Thank you for coming forward, he said. Please be careful and come to me immediately if you receive any more threats. As Catherine hurried away with her basket of deliveries, Thomas contemplated his next move. The pieces were beginning to align. The mysterious mineral, the secret meetings, the targeted poisonings, all connected to whatever had been discovered in that new mine shaft. It was time to see the mine for himself. The Colorado Silver Company's main shaft entrance was situated half a mile up the mountainside from town. A steady stream of miners moved in and out as shifts changed, their faces blackened with soot, eyes standing out starkly against grimy skin. The operation was larger than Thomas had anticipated, with several outbuildings, an ore processing area, and rail carts for transporting the silver-rich rock. Thomas found Hawthorne's office in the largest structure, a two-story building that also contained the company store where miners were obliged to purchase supplies at inflated prices, a common practice that often kept workers perpetually indebted to their employers. Hawthorne seemed unsurprised by Thomas's arrival. Ah, detective, right on schedule. I've arranged for my foreman, Mr. Blackburn, to escort you. The foreman was a barrel-chested man with a face as hard as the rock he mined. He acknowledged Thomas with a curt nod. Show Detective Blackwood the main operations, Hawthorne instructed. But remember, the new shaft remains closed for safety evaluations. Thomas caught the meaningful glance between the two men. Actually, Mr. Hawthorne, I'll need to see the new shaft specifically. That's where all our victims worked. Hawthorne's practiced smile faltered slightly. As I mentioned, that area has been deemed potentially unsafe. Then your foreman can ensure my safety, Thomas interrupted. Or perhaps you'd prefer I telegraph the Denver office about company obstruction of a federal investigation? It was a bluff. The Pinkertons were a private agency, not federal, but Hawthorne wouldn't know the exact jurisdiction. After a tense moment, Hawthorne nodded to the foreman. Very well. Show him the new shaft, but only the entrance section. Blackburn provided Thomas with a mining helmet, lamp, and a brief safety instruction before leading him into the main tunnel. The air grew progressively damper and cooler as they descended, the wooden support beams creaking occasionally under the mountain's weight. Miners worked in small groups, drilling, placing charges, and hauling out ore. The rhythmic clanking of pickaxes and rumble of distant explosions created a constant industrial symphony. "How long have you worked for Colorado Silver, Mr. Blackburn?" Thomas asked as they walked. 8 years, the foreman replied gruffly. "Started as a digger, worked my way up. And what do you make of these deaths?" Blackburn didn't break stride. "Mining's dangerous work. Men die, not usually from poisoned ale." The foreman remained silent as they continued deeper into the mountain. After 20 minutes of walking through increasingly narrow passages, they reached a wooden barrier with a large danger nitrogen monoxide entry sign. "This is the entrance to the new shaft," Blackburn stated. "As you can see, it's closed off." Thomas examined the barrier, noting that the wood was fresh, the construction recent. "I need to go inside." "Orders are orders, detective. You've seen the entrance." Thomas fixed the foreman with a level stare. "Mr. Blackburn, 7 men are dead. Whatever killed them is connected to what's behind this barrier. Now you can either help me investigate, or you can explain to a judge why you impeded an investigation into multiple deaths." Blackburn's expression remained impassive, but Thomas sensed internal calculation happening behind those stony eyes. Finally, the foreman spoke. "What I show you stays between us. Hawthorne would have my job. You have my word." Blackburn removed several boards, creating an opening large enough to pass through. "Watch your step. We haven't maintained the supports in here since closing it off." The new shaft was noticeably different from the main tunnel's narrower, with a sharper downward angle. The air felt heavier, with an unusual metallic taste that coated Thomas's tongue. "How far does it go?" Thomas asked, his lamp illuminating only a short distance ahead. "About 200 yards to the main chamber." "That's where they found it, the mineral?" Blackburn nodded. "Never seen anything like it. A vein of crystal running through the silver deposit. Black as night, but with points of light like stars." As they descended deeper, Thomas noticed his lamp seemed to dim, though the oil level remained sufficient. The silence was oppressive. No sounds of mining here, only their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. "Did you work alongside the victims?" Thomas asked. "Supervise them. Hawthorne brought them in special for this section, experienced men who knew how to keep quiet." "About what?" Blackburn stopped walking. "About things that would make investors nervous. This mineral, it's not natural. The natives avoided this whole mountain, called it sleeping darkness in their tongue." Before Thomas could press further, they rounded a bend and entered a large chamber. His lamplight fell upon the far wall, revealing what could only be the vein Blackburn had described. Even partially excavated, it was an impressive sight, a jagged line of black crystalline material embedded in the rock face, intermittently sparkling with tiny pinpoints of light that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. "My God," Thomas whispered, stepping closer. "Don't touch it," Blackburn warned sharply. "That's how it starts." Thomas kept a respectful distance, examining the strange material. "How much has been extracted?" "Several hundred pounds, shipped east under heavy security." "Hawthorne has buyers government types, I suspect." "And the men who died? They took samples for themselves?" Blackburn nodded grimly. "Foolish. This stuff isn't meant to be handled. Causes sickness with prolonged exposure. Headaches first, then worse." Thomas thought of the samples he carried in his coat pocket. Yet someone poisoned these men at the tavern. "Why, if the material itself is toxic," the foreman's expression darkened. "Because they weren't dying fast enough and they were talking too much. Hawthorne has millions invested in this operation. The government contract specifies discretion." As Thomas digested this information, he noticed something unsettling. The pinpoints of light within the black vein seemed to be concentrating in the section of wall nearest to them, as if responding to their presence. "We should leave," Blackburn said suddenly, his previously steady voice now tinged with unease. "Been down here too long already." Thomas didn't argue. As they turned to go, his lamp flickered dramatically, nearly extinguishing before stabilizing at a much dimmer level. "Happens near the vein," Blackburn explained, his own lamp similarly affected, like it eats the light. They made their way back toward the entrance in near darkness, the passage seeming longer and more convoluted than Thomas remembered. His head had begun to throb dully, and he noticed Blackburn wiping at his nose repeatedly. When they finally emerged through the wooden barrier into the main tunnel, Thomas felt immediate relief, as though a weight had been lifted from his chest. Blackburn quickly replaced the boards, his hands shaking slightly. "Now you've seen it," the foreman said. "Whatever you decide to do with that information is your business. But my advice? Let it lie, detective. Some things aren't meant to be understood." As they walked back toward daylight, Thomas realized he now had more pieces of the puzzle, but the picture forming was more disturbing than he had anticipated. The mysterious mineral, the government involvement, Hawthorne's secrecy, and 7 dead miners who knew too much. What remained unclear was the identity of the poisoner. Who had decided these men needed to die and might still decide Thomas Blackwood should join them? Thomas returned to town deep in thought, the dull headache from the mine persisting despite the fresh mountain air. The mineral samples in his pocket seemed heavier somehow, and he wondered if merely carrying them was unwise given what he'd learned. Still, they were evidence, and he wasn't ready to part with them yet. His first stop was the telegraph office, where he sent 2 messages, one to the Denver office reporting his progress, and another to a contact at the U.S. Geological Survey in Washington, requesting any information about unusual mineral deposits in the Colorado mountains, particularly those with light-absorbing properties. Next, he visited Doc Miller again, bringing the apothecary's notebook. "Could whatever poisoned these men have been derived from this mineral?" Thomas asked, showing him Simmons' chemical analysis notes. The doctor studied the pages with growing concern. "These properties are ... remarkable, if what Simmons documented is accurate. This substance could potentially be refined into a potent toxin that would produce exactly the symptoms we observed." "Someone with chemical knowledge, then?" "Certainly. And the process described here for extraction requires precision and understanding of chemical principles." Miller looked up from the notebook. "Have you considered the apothecary himself?" "He's on my list of suspects," Thomas admitted, "along with Hawthorne, who had clear motive to silence the miners. But something doesn't quite fit." Thomas returned to the boarding house to organize his thoughts and evidence. He laid everything out on the small desk in his room, the mineral samples, Simmons' notebook, his own notes on each interview, and a rough diagram of connections between the victims and potential suspects. A knock on his door interrupted his concentration. Thomas quickly covered the evidence with a map before calling. "Enter." Lillian Milner stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "May I speak with you, detective?" "It's important." Thomas ushered her inside, noting her nervous glances down the hallway as though fearful of being observed. "I shouldn't be here," she began once the door was closed, "but I can't bear it any longer. Those men, ... I knew them, not just as customers." "How well did you know them, Miss Milner?" She wrung her hands anxiously. "Michael Harrison would bring me books from Denver whenever the supply wagons came. Peterson taught me to play chess. They were kind men, detective. They didn't deserve what happened to them. Do you know who poisoned them?" Her eyes welled with tears. "I have suspicions, but no proof. That's why I've come. Last night I found something in my father's private desk, a small vial of black powder and a letter. From whom? It was unsigned, but it mentioned completing the task and final payment upon confirmation of the last subject. Detective, I don't want to believe my father capable of murder, but... Where's this letter now?" I put it back. "He would notice if it disappeared." She hesitated. "There's something else. Before the deaths began, a man visited my father late at night. They argued about money. I overheard snippets, something about silencing loose ends and protecting the investment. Could you identify this man?" She nodded reluctantly. "Mr. Hawthorne. He's been different since they opened that new mine shaft. Agitated. Secretive." Thomas considered this information. "Your father has no history of violence or criminal behavior?" "None. He was a pharmacist's assistant in St. Louis before coming west. He knows about chemicals, medicines, ... double quotes. Her voice trailed off as the implication of her own words sank in. "Thank you for coming forward, Miss Milner. I know this wasn't easy." After Lillian departed, Thomas returned to his evidence table with renewed focus. Edgar Milner had means and opportunity, and now potentially a motive if Hawthorne had hired him to eliminate the miners. But Thomas needed proof before making accusations, especially in a small town where such allegations could be deadly. The tavern would be busy now with the evening crowd. Perfect timing for Thomas to search Edgar's quarters while he was occupied downstairs. The Golden Pike's upper floor contained Edgar's living space and storage rooms. Thomas slipped up the back stairs unnoticed during a particularly rowdy moment when a miner began playing a fiddle to enthusiastic applause. Edgar's quarters were sparse but neat. Thomas searched methodically, careful to leave everything as he found it. In the desk, he discovered the letter Lillian had mentioned, confirming her account. More damning was a small lockbox hidden beneath the floorboard under the bed, containing several vials of black powder, a considerable sum of money, and correspondence from Hawthorne outlining a payment schedule that aligned perfectly with the dates of the miners' deaths. As Thomas replaced the floorboard, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, he moved behind the door just as it opened. Edgar Milner entered, immediately tensing as he sensed something amiss. Before he could turn, Thomas pressed his revolver against the tavern keeper's back. "Don't move, Milner." Pinkerton Detective Agency. "You're under arrest for the murders of 7 miners." Edgar's shoulders slumped. "You don't understand what's happening here, Detective." "I understand enough. You poisoned those men on Hawthorne's orders. The question is why?" "Because they knew too much," came another voice from the doorway. Thomas turned to see Gordon Hawthorne himself, accompanied by his 2 bodyguards, both holding pistols trained on Thomas. "Lower your weapon, Detective," Hawthorne commanded. "This situation has escalated beyond your jurisdiction." Thomas kept his gun steady. 7 counts of murder is firmly within my jurisdiction." Hawthorne smiled thinly. "What we discovered in that mountain isn't just another mineral, Detective. It's something the government considers vital to national security. Those miners threatened to sell samples to private buyers, foreign interests, potentially. They became a liability, so you had them poisoned. Regrettable but necessary. The material itself causes gradual sickness, but we couldn't wait for nature to take its course. Edgar here has quite the talent for chemical extraction." Hawthorne stepped further into the room. "Now I'm authorized to offer you a choice. Join our operation as head of security. The pay is exceptional. Join those miners in an unmarked grave." "There's a third option," Thomas replied. "You both face justice for murder." Hawthorne sighed. "I was afraid you'd take the moral position. Unfortunate, but not unexpected." He nodded to his men. "Take him too." A sudden commotion from downstairs interrupted his order shouts, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. Sheriff Wilson appeared in the doorway, his deputy beside him, both with weapons drawn. "Nobody move," the sheriff commanded. "Detective Blackwood, are you all right?" "Perfect timing, Sheriff," Thomas said, keeping his gun trained on Edgar. "I was just about to arrest these men for murder." Hawthorne recovered quickly. "Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding. We were discussing company business." "Save it," Hawthorne. Wilson cut him off. "I received a wire from Denver this afternoon. Seems the detective here sent some interesting information to his superiors, who shared it with federal authorities. They're very interested in your mining operation." Thomas hadn't expected such a rapid response to his telegraph, but he wasn't about to question good fortune. "These men poisoned 7 miners to cover up what they found in the new shaft," Thomas explained. "I have evidence linking both to the murders." As the sheriff's men disarmed Hawthorne's bodyguards, Thomas noticed Edgar reaching slowly into his pocket. "Sheriff, he's got something." Wilson spun toward the tavern keeper just as Edgar pulled out a small vial of black powder. "Stay back!" Edgar shouted, holding the vial threateningly. "This is enough to kill everyone in this room." In the momentary confusion, Hawthorne made his move, shoving past the deputy and bolting for the stairs. Thomas had to make a split-second decision: pursue Hawthorne or focus on the immediate threat of Edgar's poison. "Sheriff, get Hawthorne," Thomas yelled, keeping his attention on Edgar and the deadly vial. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Edgar said, his hand trembling. "Just a job. Clean. Simple. They weren't supposed to suffer so much." "Put it down, Edgar," Thomas said calmly, edging closer. "You can still make this right." For a moment it seemed Edgar might comply. Then his face hardened with resolve. Too late for that. In one swift motion, Edgar uncorked the vial and raised it to his own lips. Thomas lunged forward, knocking his arm upward. The vial flew from Edgar's grasp, shattering against the wall. Black powder scattered across the floorboards as the 2 men struggled. Despite his smaller stature, Edgar fought with desperate strength. They crashed into the desk, sending papers flying. Thomas managed to pin Edgar's arm behind his back, forcing him to the ground just as the deputy returned. "Hawthorne?" Thomas gasped, winded from the struggle. "Sheriff's in pursuit," the deputy replied, helping secure Edgar with handcuffs. "What about this powder? Is it dangerous?" "Don't touch it," Thomas warned, eyeing the scattered black dust wearily. "And get everyone out of the building. We don't know if it's harmful just to breathe it." As the deputy led Edgar away, Thomas quickly gathered his evidence, careful to avoid the spilled poison. Outside, a crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Thomas spotted Lillian watching from across the street, her expression a mixture of grief and relief. Sheriff Wilson returned minutes later, out of breath and empty-handed. Lost him in the trees heading toward the mine. I've got men searching, but in this darkness, quotes Thomas nodded grimly. He won't get far. The federal authorities will have the railroads and passes watched by morning, as they spoke. A wagon arrived carrying Dr. Miller and the apothecary, summoned by the deputy to safely contain the poison. What will happen now? The sheriff asked as they watched the experts work. The government will take over the mine, Thomas replied. Whatever's in that mountain, it's beyond our understanding. Those miners were just the first casualties of something much bigger. From the darkness of the surrounding forest, a single gunshot echoed across the valley. Everyone froze, listening. No further shots followed. That came from the direction of the mine, Wilson said quietly. Later that night, a search party found Gordon Hawthorne's body near the entrance to the new shaft, a revolver still clutched in his hand. Whether it was suicide or something more sinister, no one could say with certainty. A note in his pocket contained only 5 words: "It cannot be contained forever." The following morning, Colorado Pass awoke to the sight of unfamiliar men in dark suits entering the mine. Their wagons bore no markings, and they spoke to no one in town. But their authority was evident in their demeanor and the deference shown by local officials. Thomas watched from the sheriff's office as 3 large wagons departed for the mine, loaded with crates of equipment. Federal geologists, they claim, Sheriff Wilson remarked skeptically, though they look more like soldiers to me. Whatever they call themselves, Thomas replied. They're here to secure that mineral and ensure knowledge of it doesn't spread. Edgar Milner's jail cell was at the back of the sheriff's office, a simple locked room with iron bars. The tavern keeper sat motionless on his cot, staring at the wall. He had spoken little since his arrest, refusing food and acknowledging questions with only vacant looks. He'll hang for this, Wilson said. 7 counts of murder. Thomas wasn't so certain. The government may prefer a quieter resolution. Can't have a public trial revealing what's in that mountain. His suspicions were confirmed. When one of the dark-suited men entered the sheriff's office later that morning, he introduced himself simply as Mr. Collins's Department of the Interior, though his bearing suggested military training rather than bureaucratic experience. Detective Blackwood, we appreciate your diligence in this matter, Collins said. However, your official involvement ends today. The federal government is assuming jurisdiction over the case. 7 men were murdered, Thomas objected. Their families deserve justice. Collins's expression remained impassive. They will receive generous compensation for their loss. As for justice, double quotes, he glanced toward Edgar's cell. It will be administered appropriately, though not publicly. National security concerns, you understand. And the mineral? Thomas asked. What exactly did they find in that mountain? That's classified information, Detective. All I can tell you is that it's a substance previously unknown to science, with properties that could be either tremendously beneficial or catastrophically dangerous, depending on who controls it. Before departing, Collins handed Thomas an official-looking document. Your superiors in Denver have already been contacted. You're being reassigned, effective immediately. The overnight train has been arranged. Thomas recognized a dismissal when he heard one. He spent his remaining hours in Colorado Pass tying up loose ends and saying goodbye to those who had assisted his investigation. Dr. Miller shook his hand firmly. Whatever that substance is, I hope they keep it buried deep. I've never seen anything affect the human body so violently. At the boarding house, Mrs. Holloway refused payment for his stay. You brought answers, even if they weren't the ones we wanted, she said. That's payment enough. Thomas found Lillian Milner at the now-closed tavern, packing her belongings. I'm leaving for St. Louis tomorrow, she told him. Too many memories here now. Your father made terrible choices, Thomas said gently, but coming forward took courage. Remember that part? His final visit was to Sarah Harrison, still in mourning for her husband. She invited him in for tea, her demeanor calmer than during their previous meeting. They came to see me this morning, she said, men from the government. Offered me money more than Michael and I could have earned in 20 years of mining. Will you take it? She nodded slowly. What choice do I have? But I made them promise Michael would have a proper headstone. That matters more than the money. As Thomas rose to leave, Sarah pressed something into his hand, a small leather pouch. Michael would want you to have this, a reminder. Inside was a tiny fragment of the black mineral, smaller than a fingernail. Mrs. Harrison, I shouldn't. It's just a sliver. Too small to hurt anyone. Keep it, Detective. So you don't forget what happened here. The evening train pulled into Colorado Pass as the setting sun painted the mountains in fiery orange and deep purple. Thomas boarded with his modest luggage and the case file he'd been permitted to keep heavily redacted by Collins's men. As the train pulled away, Thomas gazed out the window at the receding town and the looming mountain beyond it. Workers were already constructing a new fence around the mine property, with signs warning of quarantine and government restrictions. In his pocket, the tiny fragment of black mineral seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, a cold spot against his chest. Thomas had debated surrendering it to Collins, but ultimately decided against it. Some mysteries deserve to be remembered, even if they could never be fully understood. The train rounded a bend, and Colorado Pass disappeared from view. Thomas wondered how long the government operation would continue, how much of the strange mineral they would extract, and what purposes they would find for it. But most of all, he wondered if Gordon Hawthorne's final warning would prove prophetic. It cannot be contained forever, whatever secrets that mountain held. Thomas suspected the 7 dead miners were unlikely to be the last casualties of its discovery. Some things, as the native peoples had known, were best left undisturbed in the dark places of the earth. 6 months later, Thomas sat at his desk in the Denver office, reviewing case notes for an industrial sabotage investigation. Spring had come to Colorado, bringing new growth and the promise of warmer days ahead. The events at Colorado Pass had faded from public memory. If they had ever truly penetrated it, the government had been thorough in their containment of information. Thomas had received no updates about Edgar Milner's fate, though he suspected the man had never stood trial. The official report listed the miners' deaths as accidental poisoning from contaminated alcohol, with no mention of the mine or its unusual contents. A knock on his office door roused Thomas from his thoughts. His secretary entered, carrying a letter. "This just arrived for you, sir." It's hand-delivered by a man who wouldn't leave his name. The envelope bore no return address, only Thomas's name written in neat, precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a newspaper clipping from the Scientific American Journal. The note was brief. "Detective, you may find this of interest. The work continues elsewhere. Walter Simmons, the apothecary." Thomas hadn't heard from him since leaving Colorado Pass. The clipping detailed a new scientific discovery, an unusual material found in meteorites that absorbed light and exhibited strange properties when exposed to electrical current. The government-funded research was being conducted at a laboratory in New Mexico. The article included a photograph of the research team, and Thomas immediately recognized one face among them, Gordon Hawthorne. Thomas stared at the image in disbelief. Hawthorne was supposed to be dead, his body found near the mine entrance with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Yet here he was, very much alive, identified in the caption as Dr. Gerald Hamilton, project director. The implications were staggering. Hawthorne had faked his death, assumed a new identity, and continued his work with apparent government blessing, which meant whatever had been discovered at Colorado Pass was far more significant than Thomas had realized. Acting on instinct, Thomas retrieved a small wooden box from his desk drawer. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was the fragment of black mineral Sarah Harrison had given him. It appeared unchanged, still absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Thomas had experienced occasional headaches since keeping it, though nothing severe enough to cause concern. He rewrapped the fragment carefully and locked it away again. Then he began writing a letter to his contact at the U.S. Geological Survey, inquiring about meteor strikes in Colorado's history, particularly near Colorado Pass. As he wrote, a new theory formed in his mind. What if the mineral wasn't from Earth at all? It would explain its unusual properties and the government's extreme interest. If meteoritic in origin, it represented something truly alien, a substance with unknown potential and dangers. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Pinkerton office. A man in an impeccable suit introduced himself as James Lawrence, Department of War. His credentials appeared legitimate, though Thomas had learned to be skeptical of such things. "Detective Blackwood," Lawrence began once they were seated in Thomas's private office. "I understand you've been making inquiries about certain geological anomalies in Colorado." Thomas maintained a neutral expression. Simple professional curiosity. The Colorado Pass case left unanswered questions. That case is closed. "Detective, permanently." Lawrence's tone was pleasant but firm. "However, your insights during that investigation were valuable. The government occasionally requires individuals with your skills for sensitive matters. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Lawrence? An opportunity, let's say. Your country needs men who can solve problems discreetly, particularly regarding certain materials with unique properties." Thomas thought of Hawthorne, now Hamilton, continuing his research under government protection. "And if I decline?" Lawrence smiled thinly. "Then our conversation ends here, and you continue your admirable work with the Pinkertons. But I should mention that pursuit of certain lines of inquiry might be deemed contrary to national interests." The threat was clear, if elegantly delivered. Thomas had a choice: join whatever clandestine operation Lawrence represented, or abandon his investigation into the Colorado Pass mineral. What exactly would this opportunity entail? Thomas asked carefully. Initially, consultation on a project in New Mexico. Beyond that, field work investigating reports of similar materials found elsewhere in the country. Lawrence produced a folder from his briefcase. The compensation is substantial, and you would be serving your nation at a critical time. Thomas accepted the folder but didn't open it. I'll need time to consider. Of course. 24 hours should be sufficient. Lawrence rose to leave, then paused. One more thing, Detective. Any samples of material from Colorado Pass were to be surrendered to federal authorities. I trust you complied with that directive. Thomas met his gaze steadily. Completely. After Lawrence departed, Thomas opened the folder. It contained travel documents, a preliminary contract, and photographs of what appeared to be a research facility in the New Mexico desert. One image showed a familiar black crystalline material being extracted from what looked like a meteorite fragment. The final page bore a project named Dark Star that evening. Thomas returned to his modest apartment and packed a small travel bag. He placed Sarah Harrison's mineral fragment in a lead-lined container, a precaution based on Simmons' notes suggesting lead might block some of the material's effects. Whether he would accept Lawrence's offer remained undecided, but Thomas knew he couldn't simply walk away from what he had discovered. Something extraterrestrial had been found in that Colorado mountain, something powerful enough that the government would commit murder to keep it secret. As he prepared for bed, Thomas noticed his hands trembling slightly, a symptom he'd experienced occasionally since Colorado Pass, but had dismissed as nerves or fatigue. Now he wondered if prolonged proximity to even that small fragment was affecting him. Through his window, stars glittered in the clear Denver sky. Thomas found himself wondering which distant point of light might have sent the black mineral hurtling toward Earth, and when. Had it been decades ago or centuries? Had the native peoples who avoided the mountain encountered its effects and passed down warnings through generations? More importantly, what did the government intend to do with it? Weapon development seemed the most likely explanation for the Department of War's involvement. The Cold War with Russia created endless appetite for new technologies that might ensure American superiority. Thomas made his decision. He would accept Lawrence's offer not out of patriotism or ambition, but because it was the only way to learn the truth about the material and potentially prevent more deaths like those in Colorado Pass. Whatever secrets the black mineral held, Thomas was now irrevocably connected to its discovery and the dark events it had set in motion. Like the 7 dead miners, he had been drawn into something far larger than himself, a mystery whose consequences might extend beyond anything he could imagine. As he drifted towards sleep, Thomas recalled Hawthorne's final written words, "It cannot be contained forever," whether warning or prophecy. Those words now seemed to carry the weight of inevitable truth. 3 years later, Thomas Blackwood sat alone on the porch of his small house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in gold and crimson. His time with the government's Dark Star project had aged him prematurely. Gray now dominated his once dark hair, and deep lines had formed around his eyes. The project had been educational, if disturbing. The material, officially designated Substance X-127, but colloquially called Darkstone by the researchers, had indeed been meteoritic in origin. Fragments of a larger celestial body that had impacted Earth thousands of years ago. Colorado Pass wasn't the only site. Similar deposits had been discovered in Arizona, Nevada, and northern Mexico. Thomas had helped investigate each location, documenting patterns of unusual illnesses and local legends about cursed ground. In every case, native peoples had given the areas wide berth, preserving oral histories warning of the star poison that brought sickness and death. What troubled Thomas most was the government's relentless focus on weaponizing the material. Despite mounting evidence of its hazardous effects on human health, research continued into using refined darkstone as an energy source, radiation weapon, and psychological deterrent. Thomas had resigned from the project 6 months earlier, citing health concerns. The tremors in his hands had worsened, joined by occasional lapses in memory and persistent insomnia. Medical examinations revealed nothing conclusive, but Thomas knew the cause. Prolonged exposure to darkstone had affected him just as it had the miners at Colorado Pass. His resignation had been accepted with little resistance, suggesting his usefulness had ended, or more worryingly, his health had deteriorated too much for him to be valuable. Either way, he had returned to New Mexico, purchasing this small property where he could live out whatever time remained in peace. As darkness fell, Thomas noticed a figure approaching along the dusty road leading to his house. Visitors were rare. His location was known to few, and he preferred it that way. The stranger wore a long coat despite the warm evening, and his gait seemed uneven, labored. As he drew nearer, Thomas recognized with shock a much-altered Walter Simmons. The once precise apothecary was gaunt now, his formerly meticulous appearance replaced by disheveled clothing and several days' growth of beard. Detective Blackwood, Simmons called weakly. Or should I say, Special Consultant Blackwood. Thomas rose to meet him. Simmons, I didn't expect to see you again. Nor I you, yet here we are. The apothecary's voice was raspy, his breathing labored. May I sit? The journey has been difficult. Thomas helped him to a chair, noting how the man winced with each movement. You're ill, dying to be precise. As I suspect you are as well, though perhaps more slowly. Simmons studied Thomas's trembling hands. The Darkstone. It affects everyone exposed to it eventually, just to different degrees. How did you find me? With considerable effort. After Colorado Pass, I relocated to Arizona, opened a new shop. Then the dreams began. Simmons paused, swallowing with difficulty. Dreams of a black substance that whispers. Dreams of stars falling to Earth. I began researching similar phenomena and eventually connected various government projects. Your name appeared in documents that weren't meant for public viewing. Thomas brought water for his unexpected guest. Why seek me out now? Because what they're doing with the Darkstone will bring catastrophe. Simmons took a small journal from his coat pocket. I've documented everything I've learned about the substance's properties. It's not just toxic, Blackwood. It's responsive. What do you mean? The material reacts to consciousness. The pinpoints of light you observed in the mineral vein, they respond to human thought. The more Darkstone is concentrated in one location, the stronger this effect becomes. Simmons leaned forward earnestly. The government has been consolidating all discovered deposits at the New Mexico facility. Do you understand the implications? Thomas did. He had witnessed smaller examples himself, experimental subjects reporting identical dreams after exposure to Darkstone, researchers completing each other's thoughts when working near the largest samples. They believe they're creating a weapon, Simmons continued, but they're actually building a conduit. The Darkstone was never meant to be here. It's trying to return to its point of origin, and it's using human consciousness to establish the connection. It sounded fantastical, yet Thomas couldn't dismiss it. He had experienced too many unexplainable phenomena during his time with Darkstar. What do you propose we do? Thomas asked. We're two dying men against the entire federal government. Simmons pushed his journal across the table. Information's our only weapon. I've compiled evidence from multiple sources enough to create serious questions about the project if it reached the right people. The press? Too easily discredited. We need someone within the government but outside the military-industrial complex. Someone with enough authority to force an investigation. Simmons coughed violently, bringing a handkerchief to his mouth that came away spotted with blood. I have a contact or senator on the Oversight Committee. He's expecting these documents, but I won't survive the journey to Washington. Thomas understood what was being asked of him. Despite his illness, he was in better condition than Simmons. He could potentially complete this final mission. When did you last handle Darkstone directly? Thomas asked. 8 months ago. Found a sample in Arizona, studied it before understanding what it was. Thomas nodded grimly. The progression matches what I observed in the miners. You have weeks, not months. I'm aware, Simmons replied with remarkable composure, which is why I came to you. We are both casualties of this substance, Detective. But perhaps we can prevent others from sharing our fate. That night, as Simmons rested in Thomas's spare room, Thomas reviewed the journal. It contained detailed chemical analyses, case studies of affected individuals, and most disturbing of all, evidence that the government had been aware of Darkstone's dangers from the beginning. A report dated before the Colorado Pass incidents documented similar deaths at an earlier discovery site in Nevada. Hawthorne, whatever his real name was, had known the risks when he opened that mine shaft. The miners had been deliberately sacrificed in the name of national security and scientific advancement. At dawn, Thomas made his decision. He would take Simmons's research to Washington, regardless of the personal risk. His own health was deteriorating. This might be his final opportunity to expose the truth. Simmons was weaker the next morning, barely able to rise from bed. There's one more thing you should know, he said as Thomas prepared for departure. The dreams. They're getting more specific. It's showing me something, a vision of what happens when enough Darkstone is brought together. What did you see? The dying apothecary's eyes reflected genuine terror. The sky opening, something coming through. Something ancient that has been searching for a way back to our world for millennia. He gripped Thomas's arm with surprising strength. The Darkstone isn't just a material, Blackwood. It's a key, as Thomas packed Simmons's journal alongside his own notes. He considered how far he had come from that cool October day when he first rode into Colorado Pass. He had arrived seeking justice for 7 poisoned miners, but had stumbled upon something far beyond ordinary crime and punishment, a mystery extending from the depths of a mountain to the farthest reaches of space. Whatever the Darkstone truly was, whatever purpose it served, Thomas was now committed to preventing its misuse. Like the 7 miners whose deaths had begun his journey, he too had been poisoned by the strange mineral. But perhaps, unlike them, his death might serve to protect others from a similar fate, or something far worse. With that grim resolve, Thomas Blackwood embarked on his final investigation, carrying the secrets of the Darkstone toward the nation's capital, where he would attempt to close the door that had been opened in a remote Colorado mining town 3 years before. Behind him in the small house in the New Mexico desert, Walter Simmons closed his eyes for the last time, his final thoughts consumed by visions of a sky filled with darkness and distant stars that watched with cold intelligence as humanity unwittingly prepared for their arrival.